My name is Marianne Elwood, and I am 61 years old. For most of my adult life, I considered myself a quiet woman who preferred the comfort of routine. Morning tea by the kitchen window, gardening in the late afternoon when the sun softened, reading old paperbacks before bed. I never asked for much more than a steady, respectful life with my husband, Thomas. And for the better part of our 33-year marriage, I believed I had exactly that. When Thomas and I married, I brought a dowry of $420,000, an inheritance from my father who had built his wealth slowly, carefully. It was meant to provide me security, regardless of what life might bring. Thomas had always agreed with that sentiment. He used to say, "Your father trusted me with his most precious investment." I'll never forget that. For decades, he didn't appear to. We lived modestly. We avoided debt. We raised our daughter, Claire, in a home filled with quiet dinners and worn-in laughter. Nothing extravagant. Nothing reckless. If you had asked me 5 years ago whether I believed my dowry would ever become a source of conflict, I would have answered with an easy and unwavering no. But life has a way of revealing what people are made of when money becomes involved. And families, God help us, sometimes show their truest faces when they believe they are entitled to what is not theirs. It began subtly. At first, just small comments from Thomas's sister, Evelyn. "It's impressive your father left you that much," she said once, turning her wine glass slowly. "Most women aren't that fortunate." I ignored it. Families have dynamics. Some people can't help but envy quietly. It didn't disturb me. But then Thomas's brother, Robert, asked whether we had put that dowry to good use, or if it was still sitting untouched like a museum relic. The remark wasn't just nosy, it was probing, calculated. I felt a faint tightening in my stomach, as if someone had suddenly dimmed the lights in a room I thought I knew well. Thomas brushed off my concern. "They're just being themselves," he said. "You know how my family is. They talk big, but they mean nothing by it." I wanted to believe him, but something in the air had shifted. Just slightly, just enough. A few weeks later, I would learn that their comments weren't random at all. They were the first ripples of a storm I didn't yet know was coming. A storm that would test not only my marriage, but my understanding of loyalty, trust, and love. And it would force me to do something I'd never imagined: protect my inheritance in secret. Before the conflict erupted, before voices were raised and accusations flung like stones, I remember thinking one quiet morning as I watered my hydrangeas. People only fight over what they think they can take. A thought that would prove more prophetic than I realized. As the first signs of greed grew sharper, darker, more invasive, I sensed that something was beginning. Something I wasn't yet prepared to understand, but would soon have no choice but to confront head-on. And it all started with my dowry. And the first true sign of betrayal came on an evening so ordinary, so deceptively calm, that I still recall the sound of the clock ticking when everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening, just after dinner. Thomas sat at the dining table with a stack of old financial folders spread out before him. I didn't think much of it. He handled most of our day-to-day accounts, and I trusted him. After 33 years of marriage, trust becomes something you wear like a second skin. But as I approached with a cup of chamomile tea, he snapped the folders shut. Not quickly enough, though. I caught a glimpse of something I hadn't seen in decades: the ledger detailing the exact amount of my dowry. I froze. He didn't notice. At least, he pretended not to. "What are you doing with those old papers?" I asked, setting the tea down. He hesitated. It was subtle but unmistakable. "Just organizing," he said. "Your father's files were getting dusty." "My father's files? You mean my dowry?" Thomas's shoulders stiffened. "It's our money, Marianne. We've been married long enough for it to be considered marital property." That was the moment the world tilted beneath me. The calm, steady man I trusted was choosing his words with an intention I had never heard before. I sat opposite him. My father was very clear. The dowry was for me. For my security. "I know what he said," Thomas replied, rubbing his temples as if I were the one being unreasonable. "But circumstances change." "What circumstances?" Before he could answer, the doorbell rang. And standing on the porch were Evelyn and Robert, faces stiff, rehearsed, almost anticipatory. They entered without waiting for my invitation. The air felt suddenly small, packed too tightly with the three of them inside it. Something was wrong, terribly, unquestionably wrong. Robert cleared his throat. "We need to discuss the dowry, Marianne." My heartbeat stumbled. "Why?" Evelyn smiled with a sweetness that never reached her eyes. "Because it affects the family. And now that Thomas is considering early retirement, We think it's time to reallocate assets fairly. Reallocate? I repeated slowly. What on earth are you talking about? Thomas exhaled sharply, as though embarrassed. They're concerned about my financial stability. They think, well, we all think, that the dowry should be shifted into a family account. Something everyone can access if needed. I felt every cell in my body go cold. Everyone? My dowry. It's not just about you, Evelyn said. You married into a family. That money supports the household. Therefore, it supports us. There it was, the truth laid bare like a knife on a table. Their eyes reflected something predatory. Cold. Entitled. As if they were circling something they believed they already owned. I looked at Thomas, the man who had once held my father's hand and promised to cherish what was entrusted to him. He didn't meet my gaze. Thomas, I said softly, do you agree with them? A long, painful silence. Then, it makes sense, Marianne. The betrayal was quiet, almost gentle. That made it hurt more. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply stood, walked out of the room, and closed the door behind me. And in that moment, standing in the hallway, feeling the walls tilt inward, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Because earlier that week, by sheer accident, I had overheard a conversation that changed everything. And now I finally understood its meaning. 2 days before the confrontation, I had been pruning the rosemary bushes outside when I overheard Thomas on the phone. He wasn't aware that the window was open, nor that I was standing just a few feet away. He spoke in a hushed, restrained voice, not angry, not emotional. Just calculating. Yes, he said. It's still in her name. I've told you that. But if we push the idea of consolidating assets, I think she'll fold. She always does when the three of us are aligned. I remember pausing, my pruning shears hanging in midair. The three of us. Fold. At the time, I tried to explain it away. I assumed he meant something harmless. But now, in hindsight, the pieces snapped together with chilling clarity. This wasn't a sudden concern. This wasn't anxiety about retirement. This was a plan, a coordinated effort. And what made the betrayal deeper, more personal, was how it tied into older patterns I had ignored for years. Thomas's family had never fully accepted me. They tolerated me. I was different from them, quieter, more deliberate, less interested in keeping up appearances. They viewed my inheritance as something I didn't deserve, because I was not born into wealth. My father, a former machinist who built a small manufacturing business from scratch, instilled in me a deep respect for both money and independence. He gave me that dowry because he loved me, yes, but also because he wanted me to be safe, even in marriage. Thomas's family, on the other hand, operated on entitlement. They believed wealth flowed to those who desired it, not those who earned it. They were accustomed to leaning on each other financially, slipping in and out of each other's pockets whenever the need arose. I had always kept a polite distance. But now I realized they had spent years waiting, circling quietly, watching for the moment they could claim what was never theirs. And Thomas, my husband, my partner, had been slowly influenced by them. Not because he needed the money, but because he feared disappointing them. He had always been the dutiful younger brother, the one who avoided conflict, the one who let others steer him so long as it kept the peace. What I had mistaken for kindness was, in truth, passivity coded in good manners. And passivity, when paired with greed from those around him, could be just as dangerous as malice. After 33 years of marriage, I finally saw the dynamic clearly. Thomas was not the leader of his family. He was their instrument. The realization felt like stepping into a cold lake. Breath-stealing. Clarifying. In that moment, an entire lifetime of small, easily dismissed moments resurfaced. Comments Evelyn had made behind tight smiles, financial advice from Robert dripping in disguised condescension, Thomas's subtle discomfort any time I discussed maintaining separate accounts. Piece by piece, the puzzle revealed itself. And with it, their motive. My dowry wasn't just money. It was independence. It was history. It was a legacy they believed should belong to them simply because they wanted it. And now they were prepared to pressure me, emotionally, socially, and even financially, until I surrendered it. But they hadn't counted on one thing. I had inherited more than money from my father. I had inherited his resolve. And so, the next morning, I began my quiet investigation, and what I discovered in Thomas's desk drawer changed everything. I waited until Thomas left to meet his siblings at a cafe. He said they were discussing family matters, which no longer needed translation. When the house was finally silent, I walked into his study. I didn't feel guilty. A marriage built on mutual trust does not require secrecy, but a marriage where one partner conspires against the other forfeits that privilege. I opened the top drawer of his desk, the one he rarely used. It contained nothing of interest: pens, receipts, an old calculator. But the second drawer, the deeper one, was locked. Thomas had never locked anything before. I retrieved the small brass key he kept taped under the desk, a habit of his since our early years. He thought it made him clever. The drawer opened with a quiet click, and inside lay several documents arranged with deliberate care. At the top was a printed email thread. The subject line read, "Dowry allocation proposal." My breath caught. The emails were between Thomas, Evelyn, and Robert. They had been discussing options for redistributing my dowry for months. One excerpt burned itself into my memory. If she refuses, we need to present it as a family necessity. Emphasize that it's irresponsible for her to keep that kind of money separate at her age. Make her feel selfish. Selfish. At my age. The cold calculation in those words shook me. But the documents beneath the emails were worse. There was a preliminary draft of a financial consolidation agreement, with spaces for signatures. My name, Thomas's, and unbelievably, a line labeled family representative. Evelyn. I stared at the page for a long moment, the edges of reality feeling strangely soft. They weren't just discussing it. They were preparing paperwork. Then, in a folder at the bottom of the drawer, I found bank statements. Not ours. Thomas had quietly withdrawn $10,000 from our joint savings account, money he had funneled to his siblings for business expenses. I felt a cold calm wash over me. Not emotionless, just focused. Sharp. Decisive. My father used to say, "Never confront dishonesty until you have enough truth to drown it." And now I did. I scanned everything, saved digital copies to a secure drive, and stored the originals in a folder I placed in my locked suitcase. Then I sat down at my own desk and made several phone calls. First to my financial advisor, then to an estate planner, and finally to a trust attorney, a woman named Darlene whose voice had the cool steadiness of someone who had seen every kind of betrayal. "Move the dowry," she said. Quietly. Legally. Immediately. I followed her instructions to the letter, transferring every cent of my inheritance into a separate, irrevocable trust that named only me and my daughter as beneficiaries. A firewall of legality they could never penetrate, not through coercion, manipulation, or marital pressure. When the trust activation was complete, I sat back in my chair and exhaled slowly. I did not feel triumphant. I felt protected, and for the first time in weeks, grounded. But I knew the calm wouldn't last long, because if they were already pushing this hard, the storm that was coming would not be gentle. And the storm arrived that very night, when Thomas found the locked drawer empty, and demanded to know what I had done. When Thomas returned that evening, I could hear from the weight of his footsteps that something had unsettled him. He walked into the living room holding the empty folder I had removed from his desk. "Where are the papers, Marianne?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry, just strained, as if he were barely containing the pressure building inside him. I closed my book calmly. "Which papers?" "Don't do that," he snapped. "You know which ones." I met his eyes steadily. "The ones where you and your siblings discuss how to manipulate me into giving up my dowry." His face paled. He hadn't expected that. "Marianne, it's not what you think." "Then explain it," I said softly. "Use your own words, not theirs." He sank into the chair across from me, rubbing his forehead. "I'm under a lot of pressure. Evelyn and Robert, they're struggling and they think my father's legacy belongs to them," I interrupted. "They think you can persuade me to hand it over. And you agreed." He looked away. "That told me everything." I continued. "You allowed them to convince you that you are entitled to money that isn't yours. Money that was meant to protect me." "I'm your husband," he murmured weakly. "Doesn't that count for anything?" "It counts," I said. "But it doesn't entitle you to betray me." A long silence. Then his voice grew sharper. "You shouldn't have gone through my things. And you shouldn't have conspired with your siblings," I replied. His jaw tightened. "Where's the money, Marianne?" "Safe. Protected. Untouchable." But I didn't answer. Instead, I let the silence swell between us like thick, heavy smoke. He stood abruptly. "Evelyn and Robert are coming over. We need to talk about this. All of us." I nodded once. "Good." When they arrived, their expressions were hard, rehearsed. They thought they were walking into a negotiation, a debate, perhaps even an intimidation. They didn't know they were walking into a truth they couldn't outrun. I laid the printed emails and draft documents on the table, one by one, like cards in a game they hadn't realized they'd already lost. Evelyn's face darkened. You had no right to invade our private discussions. I smiled faintly. Funny. That's exactly how I felt reading things you wrote about me. Robert leaned forward. Where's the money? Thomas said you moved it. Correct, I said calmly. It has been placed where it legally belongs, in a trust that none of you will ever have access to. Not through persuasion. Not through guilt. Not through pressure. You can't do that, Evelyn hissed. I already did, I answered. The room fell silent. For the first time, they understood they had underestimated me. Your behavior is cruel, Robert finally said. We are family. No, I replied gently. Family protects each other. Family doesn't plot behind closed doors and call it concern. I had documented everything. Recorded timestamps. Secured digital and physical copies. They were exposed, not in anger, but in undeniable truth. Thomas looked between his siblings and me, torn and bewildered. He had expected compliance. Instead, he was faced with accountability. And accountability, for people accustomed to taking without resistance, feels like an attack. But the real confrontation, the moment everything shattered, happened the next day, when Thomas gave me an ultimatum that sealed our fate. The morning after exposing their scheme, the house was unervingly quiet. Thomas didn't come downstairs for breakfast. I didn't force conversation. I had learned long ago that silence speaks volumes. By mid-afternoon, he emerged from the study looking exhausted. Or perhaps simply defeated. In his hand was a typed document, a draft of a marital financial agreement. Something he must have printed earlier. He placed it on the table in front of me with a trembling breath. Sign this, he said. It states that we both have equal claim to all assets. It's fair. I looked up at him calmly. It's not fair. It's coercive. It's not coercion, he insisted. It's partnership. No, I replied. Partnership involves trust. What you're doing involves pressure. His voice broke slightly. If you don't sign this, Marianne, I don't know if we can continue like this. There it was. An ultimatum. The final tool of someone who had run out of persuasion. You're choosing them, I said quietly. Over me. Over our marriage. I'm choosing unity, he argued. Families stay together. Healthy families, I corrected. Yours is not. The words stunned him. Not because they were harsh, but because they were true. He slumped into the chair opposite me. I don't want to lose you. Then why are you trying to force me into something you know is wrong? He didn't answer. His silence was the answer. I pushed the unsigned document back toward him. I will not sign away my security, my father's legacy, or my dignity. And if you continue to insist, you will lose me. We stared at each other across the table. 33 years of history suspended between us. Then, I reached into my folder and placed a stack of papers before him. Copies of the emails, bank transfer records, paperwork from the trust attorney. I confronted you with truth, I said. You confronted me with an ultimatum. He swallowed hard. For our marriage to survive, I continued, you must choose integrity over loyalty to people who don't have your best interests at heart. We sat in silence for what felt like a full minute. Then he whispered, I need time. You'll have it, I said. But my boundaries are set. And they are final. Later that evening, Evelyn called Thomas. I heard her voice through the open door of the study. She's manipulating you, she hissed. Stand firm. If she wants to stay married, she'll give in. For the first time, Thomas responded not with agreement, but with uncertainty. I'm not sure anymore, he said. Maybe we went too far. Evelyn's furious voice cut through the phone. Don't be weak, Thomas. But I heard something shift in him, a fracture in the influence they had held over him for decades. When he finally hung up the phone, he came to me with tears in his eyes. I don't know how to fix this, he said. I looked at him with quiet steadiness. Start by choosing honesty. And the consequences of that choice arrived sooner than either of us expected, when Evelyn and Robert took matters into their own hands. 2 days later, I received a certified letter. At first glance, it looked like legal correspondence. Inside, however, was a typed statement, signed by Evelyn and Robert, accusing me of withholding marital assets and destabilizing the family's financial future. It wasn't an actual lawsuit, just intimidation dressed up in formality. I read the letter slowly, then folded it neatly back into the envelope. My hands didn't tremble. My pulse didn't race. Fear had long since given way to clarity. When Thomas discovered the letter on the counter, he rushed toward me. "I didn't know they were sending anything," he said quickly. "I swear I didn't." "I believe you," I said. And I meant it. For the first time in weeks, he seemed genuinely shaken. By them, not by me. He grabbed his keys. "I'm going to talk to them." "Go," I said calmly. "You need to." He returned 3 hours later, looking as though the ground beneath him had collapsed. "They threatened to cut me out," he said quietly. "Evelyn said if I don't stand with them, I'm no longer part of the family. They said I was betraying them." "And what did you tell them?" I asked. He looked at me, really looked at me. And for the first time, I saw the man I married, not the man they shaped. "I told them the only betrayal was theirs," he whispered. "I told them I was done." He sat heavily on the couch. "It was ugly, Marianne. They said I was being manipulated, that you were taking advantage of my weakness." I shook my head gently. "You are not weak, Thomas. You were influenced. And now you are choosing differently." The next morning, he sent them a formal letter of his own, stating that he no longer wished to participate in any discussion about my dowry, my finances, or the redistribution of assets. He also informed them that he was seeking counseling to understand why he had allowed himself to be controlled for so long. They responded with silence, and then blocked numbers, cut ties. It hurt him more than he admitted, but it also freed him. As for me, the trust stood firm, irrevocable, legally sealed. My daughter Claire expressed relief when I told her. "Grandpa would be proud," she said. "You protected what he gave you." The consequences, though painful, were necessary. Toxic ties severed. Boundaries reinforced. Marriage recalibrated. Thomas apologized, not once but many times. Not dramatic. Not performative. Just sincere, steady remorse. Then, one evening, he said something that shifted everything. "You weren't protecting the money, Marianne. You were protecting yourself. And I should have done that with you." It was the first moment I believed we might truly heal. But healing requires reflection. And the final chapter of this story is not about them, or even about Thomas. It's about what I learned, and what I want others to hear. In the weeks that followed, peace slowly returned to the house. Not the old peace, the fragile, surface-level calm that existed before everything broke open. This was a deeper one, a quieter one, built on truth, boundaries, and a hard-earned understanding of what loyalty means. Thomas and I began counseling. We unpacked years of subtle manipulation, quiet compromises, and unspoken fears. He admitted how deeply his siblings' expectations had shaped him. I admitted how often I had avoided conflict to keep the peace. We both learned. We both changed. The trust remained untouched, a symbol not of separation, but of self-respect. Thomas never asked about it again. Not once. Instead, he helped me organize the paperwork, set up a digital archive, and ensure Claire understood its purpose and protections. In time, the subject of his family faded like a distant storm that had finally moved beyond the horizon. Painful, but past. And me? I discovered a part of myself I had long underestimated. Strength does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it sits quietly while others rage, letting truth stand on its own feet. Sometimes it takes the shape of a signature on a trust document, drawn with calm resolve. I learned that protecting yourself is not selfish. It is sacred, necessary, wise. I learned that love without boundaries becomes sacrifice without meaning. And most importantly, I learned that a woman who honors her worth can withstand any storm, because her foundation is built on truth, not approval. In the final session with our counselor, she asked me, "Marianne, what do you want your life to be now?" I answered without hesitation. Peaceful, honest, and mine, because my dowry was never just money. It was a promise, one my father made to me, and one I finally learned to make to myself. To anyone listening, protect what is yours. Honor your boundaries. And never be afraid to stand alone if standing alone means standing in truth. I am 61 years old, and for the first time in a long time, I feel safe. Greed reveals character. Boundaries reveal strength. And truth, spoken calmly and clearly, reveals who stands with you and who stands against you. If you were in my position, would you have moved the money too? Share your thoughts. I'd love to hear them.